Number 10. Hulk smash? X-Men? This happened during World War Hulk. Hulk had been sent to Sakaar and believed that the Illuminati were not only responsible for sending him off-world, but also for destroying the planet that he had made his new home and his future family there as well. Coming back to Earth and pissed, he began to hunt down all members of the Illuminati, including those who weren't even at the meeting. Enter Charles Xavier. While Charles was not one of the members to condemn the Hulk as he was not in attendance, Hulk still wanted to know what Charles would have voted had he been there. Charles told him the truth, that he also would have voted to send Hulk off-world. Hulk wanted to hold Charles accountable for what he saw as his potential crimes, since, Charles didn't actually vote, but before he could take him away, the X-Men stepped in to defend the professor. Hulk then began to beat down any and all mutants or allies who would stand in his way. It was a slaughter. All this despite the fact that Charles wasn't even there, and these mutants really didn't have a say in the matter of Hulk being sent off-world to begin with. In the end, Hulk was shamed into stopping his attack and leaving Xavier be by the mutant Mercury. Thank goodness. Number 9. Schism. Schism isn't necessarily a bad idea on paper, but it was one of the darkest moments in X-Men history, so in a way it was the worst for the mutants themselves, in terms of in-canon, as opposed to, us readers. What went down here? Well, Cyclops and Wolverine fought and created a huge split down the middle between mutant kind, especially mutant students, as each had their own beliefs when it came to as how best to shape these young minds. What might seem odd about Schism is that it was about a divide between Psych and Wolvie, who are not really known for being super friendly anyways, due to their infighting about, who should get a date Jean Grey. However, it should also be noted that Cyclops and Wolverine, despite both loving Jean, are actually considered to be pretty close and are good friends. That is until they get into a disagreement about how best to teach young mutants. Like I said, they've gotten into a lot of disagreements before that, but this one was pretty big. Wolverine thinks that they should be treated as kids, and Cyclops thinks they should be trained as soldiers. What makes it worse is just as a Sentinel attacks the mutant island of Utopia, Cyclops and Wolverine decided to fight one another over the differentiating standpoints as opposed to dealing with the Sentinels, which is, I know you guys are having a fight, but like a Sentinel's attacking? I feel like we should deal with that first. Number 8. Cyclops recruits X-23 for X-Force. X-Force is a team that is sometimes referred to as the X-Men Black Ops team. They go in and do the jobs that others are not willing to do. The more shady and morally questionable heroic stuff. X-Force originally started as Cable's team that went around dealing with situations and taking out people that basically Cable thought needed to be handled. But from there would evolve into a secret X-Men team that handled assassinations and less desirable jobs. At one point, it's Cyclops who puts the team together during the mutants' time on Utopia. He appoints Wolverine the leader, but also puts X-23 on the team against Logan's wishes. This is because X-23, Laura Kinney, has only known killing pretty much her whole life. She was made to be a weapon, and Logan wanted her to have a say moving forward in what she did with her life. He didn't want her to have to feel like she always had to be a weapon. She could be more than that. But Cyclops feels she's too useful to not have on the team. Needless to say, it was not a good look for Psych, and Logan was pretty pissed. Number 7. The first live-action Juggernaut. While the version of Juggernaut from the Deadpool franchise appears relentless in a really great way, the first attempt at the character on screen was not so great. Even the actor that played Juggernaut in the Foxx X-Men franchise, Vinnie Jones, appearing in X-Men The Last Stand, supposedly claimed he was even disappointed with the portrayal as well. The problem with this version of Juggy was that he wasn't really intimidating enough. Also, that outfit. I don't think it works great on camera. If it weren't for the Juggernaut's displays of easily smashing through walls, I feel like we'd have a hard time recognizing him here, even with him clearly stating who he is to the audience while he's in pursuit of Kitty Pryde. Number 6. Inhumans vs. X-Men. Possibly one of the weirdest storylines we've ever gotten, especially as Inhumans were kind of attempted to be utilized before in the comics to be like a backup to the X-Men. Not saying I don't love the Inhumans, by the way, but after Marvel sold the rights of the X-Men to Foxx, they basically made an attempt to kind of catapult the Inhumans into popularity, and that really just didn't work out too well. The Inhumans were made by the Kree and were modified humans who basically get powers through a process called Terrigenesis, where they're exposed to Terrigen mists. They usually keep to themselves, so to have them fight any mutant group feels kind of weird straight out of the gate. The reasoning between them and the X-Men having beef? Well, it turns out that apparently Terrigen Mists are like poison to mutant kind, and despite the Inhumans attempting to work things out and come to some kind of peaceful resolution when mutant kind were accidentally hurt by mists released on Earth because they actually felt pretty bad about it, the two groups ended up in a war. What makes it even worse is that the catalyst for this war, the dramatic death of Cyclops at the hands, or rather the voice, of Black Bolt, is revealed to have been staged by Emma Frost to give mutants a reason to fight back against a group that never really wanted to fight to begin with. So what are we even talking about here? Number 5. Cyclops and Emma Frost make out on Jean Grey's grave. Oh boy. Yeah, there are a lot of things that have not been great when it comes to Cyclops' history. Sorry, Cyclops. I love you, Scott, but you do some questionable things, man. I mean, he's done a lot of good things, but he's also been part of some of the biggest scandals in all of mutant history. Case in point, his psychic affair with Emma Frost, and following that, his making out on Jean's grave with Emma after Jean had died. Wolverine certainly was not impressed with any of this. While many still ship and love Cyclops and Emma together, even many of the fans of the couple would agree it was a pretty weird moment. However, Jean's ghost gave the couple her blessing, so I guess we're just supposed to be cool with it. I mean, I guess if Jean's ghost is fine with it, then we're just supposed to be like, yeah, alright, why not? Make out on that grave. You guys are in love. It's cool. And friends, before we move on to this next spot, if you are loving this list and you want to see a part 2, because you know there's a lot of terrible things that have happened in X-Men history, please be sure to let us know by giving this video a thumbs up. Number 4. Professor X and Jean Grey. In particular, Professor X's initial feelings about Jean back in the Stan Lee, Jack Kirby days of the X-Men. We all know that Cyclops, aka Scott Summers, has always had a thing for Jean, but when it comes to the classic X-Men team, he actually wasn't the only one. In fact, pretty much everyone was head over heels for Jean at one point. Maybe except Bobby, who back in the day did like to flirt, but mainly was in love with ice cream. I mean, Bobby was the youngest of the bunch, and even me, not necessarily being the youngest of any bunch, I still love ice cream, so fair enough, Bobby. You eat that ice cream. Both Angel and Beast also seem to hold a bit of a flame for the lone female member of the X-Men team at that time, with Angel actually being pretty close at times to winning Jean's heart. But that's not where it ended. Even Charles Xavier, Jean's mentor and teacher, was apparently in love with her? Why is this so bad? While at the time the X-Men came across as more young adults at times than teenagers, in retrospect it would be established that Charles, as a grown man, had come to Jean's aid when her powers first manifested and shielded her from them with mental blocks to protect her from basically the sheer power that would otherwise probably have destroyed her. So she was maybe 8 or 10, I think, when this happened, and he was an adult? Okay. Add in the fact that even back in the 60s run, Charles was her professor and Jean was his student, and the fact that Professor X chiefly blamed his lack of ability to walk as a reason why he couldn't, nay shouldn't, be with Jean, and it's all kinda weird and pretty gross. Look, Charles, you don't have to walk for people to love you, but also don't have crushes on your students, it's weird. Number 3. Archangel and Husk. One of the strangest relationships to have ever existed in the X-Books. One of. Or at the very least, one of the most controversial was the one between Archangel and Husk. Why was it considered so weird? Well, Angel was one of the first ever X-Men on the original team back in the 60s. Now, time works weird in comics, I'll grant you that, but Husk was known to be the younger sister of Cannonball, who himself was a much later addition to the X-Men, first appearing almost 20 years after Angel on the New Mutants team in 1982. And Husk, Paige Guthrie, his younger sister, appeared 2 years later in 1984. She was believed to be in her late teens or maybe her early 20s, while Angel, although somewhat ageless, would likely be in his 30s at least, if not older, because yeah, he was around in the 60s, so we gotta do some fixing to make that make sense. And it was implied that he was quite a bit older throughout their relationship as well, just in the comics, in the context of the relationship and what they would say to each other. Add in the fact that these two got busy in the sky above the Guthrie family home, and yeah, you can see why this feels really problematic and weird. Number 2. X-Men Gold Controversy. Oh boy, the X-Men Gold Controversy. X-Men Gold was actually a series that many X-Men fans were really excited for at the time. It promised a fresh, new take on X-Men the fans were craving, but when it came out, the first issue's release was swept up in a whirlwind of controversy in regards to its first printing. This was because the artist, Ardian Syaf, who is said to have hidden political symbolism in the issue, which directly related to a protest in Indonesia against the Christian governor of Jakarta, known as Ahok. Overall, the protest was considered to be quite conservative in regards to political sides, and those protesting Ahok wanted him jailed for being a blasphemer when he referred to a passage in the Quran during his campaign. Now, he apologized for doing so, but people were still really angry about it, and Syaf was supposedly among those at the protest and decided to include the political and religiously charged numbers in the first issue of the book, which are also said to stand for a passage that is interpreted in Indonesia speaking against accepting Jews or Christians as Muslim leaders. So even though apparently there were a lot of things that were misconstrued with all of that, it still was just not great. It's not great. Number 1. Genocian Mutant Massacre. The history of Genocian has pretty much been tumultuous and widely awful since the start. The island nation prospered for most of its history thanks to mutants who were born there and once identified had their free will stripped of them, all their rights taken away, and were basically used as free laborers for the benefit of the nation, no longer being considered citizens but the property of the Genocian government once they were identified as mutants. Pretty terrible stuff. Eventually, the mutants on the island would rise up with some help, but even after that, it would not be easy to set things right. There was a lot of fighting that happened on Genocian even after the mutants were kind of trying to get their rights back. At one point, Magneto got ownership of the island nation and attempted to turn it into a nation for mutant kind, a place mutants could call their own, reclaiming it and turning it into a little slice of paradise for them. An attempt at what we have kind of with Krakoa today. Hopefully it ends better for Krakoa though. For Genocian, millions of mutants were murdered on the island after it was attacked by Cassandra Nova's Wild Sentinels. It was a brutal and dark moment in mutant history, with the island being put on quarantine so that even those who did survive and tried to get away were ordered to be shot on sight. A lot of people like to focus on House of M and M-Day, but Genocian was a mass extinction mutant event, and it was a really brutal attack.
At number 10 is when Spider-Man has his eye ripped out and eaten. Starting off the list on a light note, this moment comes from a 2005 storyline called The Other, in which the supervillain Morlun returns from the dead to kill Spider-Man. And at this point in the story, Spidey is weakened, leaving him vulnerable to some more gruesome beatdowns such as this one. Morlun basically catches up to Spider-Man and beats him up within an inch of his life, and before taking off, gouges out Spidey's left eye and devours it right in front of him, saying, delicious. It's a state we're not used to seeing Peter Parker in, so beaten down and dismembered like this, so I figured it had to go on the list. At number 9 is the time when Spidey gets buried alive by Kraven. This devastating moment takes place in the Kraven's Last Hunt storyline when Kraven tracks down and shoots Spider-Man, seemingly killing him and then burying him in a grave on the grounds of his mansion. When the job seems to be done, Kraven then takes on the mantle of Spider-Man himself and terrorizes New York as a much more violent and unforgiving version of the hero. Luckily, Spider-Man wakes up after some troubling nightmares, realizing that he had only been tranquilized all along. He gets to Kraven and takes him down, but still needs to face the challenge of rebuilding his damaged reputation. At number 8 is the horribly infamous event of, trigger warning, Spider-Man and Mary Jane losing their baby in the late stages of pregnancy. Luckily, it's later revealed that the baby was actually born happy and healthy, but had been stolen by Norman Osborn. However, they don't know that, and neither do the readers for a while. Before this strange twist is revealed, we're left with one of the darker moments in Spider-Man franchise history, and it's no picnic. It really puts an otherwise invulnerable neighborhood hero, and of course Mary Jane herself, in a very shocking and very real crisis. And not to mention, it leads to the beginning of the decline of Peter and Mary Jane's marriage altogether. That Norman Osborn really plays hardball on the psychological game, doesn't he? At number 7, we have the time when Ultimate Spider-Man dies. In the second volume of the Ultimate storyline, launched in the year 2009, the Earth 1610 Peter Parker is behind the Ultimate Spider-Man mask, and on one fateful day, he actually loses his battle against the Green Goblin and the rest of the Sinister Six. Between issues 156 and 160, we see Spider-Man face off against a group of brutal bad guys, mostly right in front of Aunt May and Mary Jane. The whole time he's met with so much firepower that he even needs Aunt May to step in at one point with a revolver, taking out Electro before he's able to finish off Peter himself. What's most devastating about this moment is that this isn't even some older, more mature iteration of Spider-Man. He's just a teenager when this happens, and when he dies it just leaves a mark that stays with you. Good thing Miles Morales is there to take over for him, but it still doesn't fully soften the blow of what happens. At number 6, we have the time when a zombie Spider-Man eats Aunt May and Mary Jane. On Earth 2149, there happens to be a virus that has taken over all the Marvel heroes, turning them into zombies. And that of course includes Peter Parker. And before he knows he's infected, he swings back home to warn Aunt May and Mary Jane about the infection. But while he's there, he succumbs to the virus himself and goes feral, killing Mary Jane first and then turning on Aunt May. But this isn't any typical zombie infection. Spider-Man is totally sentient and knows exactly what's going on while he's doing it. He just can't control himself. So, in the moment when he turns on Aunt May, he's actually warning her to leave the room, knowing that he's gonna end up turning on her if she doesn't. It's brutal. At number 5, I'm putting the time when Peter loses his parents again. Well, he doesn't really lose them twice, but he goes through the experience of losing them twice. When both his parents seem to make a sudden and mysterious reappearance, Peter Parker can't help but be ecstatic. He's told that they'd been held captive in Algeria his whole life at the hands of Red Skull, and that they were back and here to stay. But right as Peter finally comes around and accepts this as the truth, it gets revealed that they aren't his parents at all, but androids created by Chameleon, a plan orchestrated by Harry Osborn. Spider-Man gets seriously traumatized by this and has a nervous breakdown, and what's worse is that somehow in the same instance, Aunt May learns about Peter's identity as Spider-Man, complicating and changing his life even further. At number 4 is one of the classics that we all know about, the murder of Uncle Ben. This is the seminal awful moment in Spider-Man history and couldn't be left off the list because it's what drives Peter Parker to become who he becomes. In a way, I wanted to put this one further back on the list because it also brings a lot of good to the innocent people of the world and to fans of Spider-Man's work. It also brought us all the iconic saying, "With great power comes great responsibility," which sort of transcends the Spider-Man comics entirely. So, I wanted to put this entry at number 9 or even 10, but then I thought about how it made Peter Parker himself feel and I realized maybe that was a little selfish for me. So, it's at number 4. This event takes place way back in Amazing Fantasy issue 15 in 1962, which also marks the first time we see Spider-Man make his debut. At number 3, we have the time when, trigger warning again, Peter Parker gives Mary Jane cancer in the Spider-Man Reign miniseries. And the way this happens makes it even more brutal. In fact, so brutal I won't even spell it out here because this channel needs to stay PG, so you can Google it if you want to know the details, but I will do my best. Basically, in a distant, gritty alternate future, we're introduced to a world where an elderly Peter Parker is struck with guilt over his accidental killing of Mary Jane. But this isn't because of some successful attempt on her life by a supervillain, nor did Spider-Man accidentally drop her from a rooftop or something like that. Let's just say that while being intimate with her, he didn't realize that certain properties that came in contact with MJ turned out to be so radioactive as a result of his powers that it made her sick. And after too many instances of this radioactive contact, MJ got so sick that she passed away. So, there we go. At number 2, we have the classic, the iconic, the horribly iconic, like iconic in a bad way, death of the MCU Peter Parker in Infinity War. Now, Peter Parker gets killed at the hands of Thanos in both the comics and the movies, but it's pretty much unanimous that the MCU moment is a lot sadder all around. We all know how brutal it was to watch such a young iteration of Peter Parker fade away at the end of the movie in the way that he does. And even though that isn't actually the end for Spider-Man, it is a really shocking reminder that even the most lovable and seemingly untouchable heroes can meet an end on a dime like this. It's just a bleak moment and one that will always be known as one of the worst moments in Spider-Man history. Finally, at number 1 is the gut-wrenching moment when Spider-Man accidentally kills Gwen Stacy in The Amazing Spider-Man number 121. When she's kidnapped by the Green Goblin and taken to the Brooklyn Bridge, Norman Osborn lets go, and we all watch her fall to her death. But Spider-Man gets to her just in time, so he thinks, spinning a web that catches her ankle and stops her mid-fall. Although we all know what happens next, which ends up haunting Peter Parker for years to come. The whiplash that Gwen's body experiences from the sudden change in velocity snaps her neck, killing her instantly. Although this isn't actually Spider-Man's fault, it can be seen how something like this could plague someone's existence with guilt for the rest of their life. And to be easier on Spidey, the Green Goblin does claim that the fall would have killed Gwen before she hit the ground anyway, meaning that possibly her neck didn't break, but the idea online is that her neck breaks from the whiplash, and I haven't seen it any other way, so that's what I'm sticking with. I wish it wasn't that way, but it seems like that's what happens. Either way, this is a horribly iconic moment in the comics, and probably the first thing that a real Spidey fan thinks of when they're asked to name one of the worst moments in Spider-Man history.
Number 10. The Fate of Squid-Boy. Squid-Boy and his friendship with Juggernaut was one of the redeeming elements of Chuck Austin's run on the X-Men, which is pretty widely disliked among fans of the X-Men. Austin's run is also the one that featured the relationship which was highly controversial between Husk and Angel. However, one of the things that was pretty cool about his run was how Juggernaut was brought into the book and somewhat redeemed. Juggernaut even befriended Sammy, known as Squid-Boy, a young mutant who was ridiculed at school for his appearance and came to join the Xavier Institute. Squid-Boy would save Juggernaut's life, and the two would become friends, with Kane even becoming like a father to Squid-Boy, whose own father mistreated him as Kane's once had. Despite them both protecting one another, at one point Squid-Boy stumbles upon a meeting that Juggernaut is attending with the Brotherhood of Evil Mutants. Gasp. Tragically, Squid-Boy did not know that Juggernaut was acting as a double agent for the X-Men. Causing a scene and accusing Juggernaut of being a traitor, Black Tom Cassidy reacted by killing the young mutant. What an end to that initially sweet and uplifting story. And friends, before we move on to this next spot, if you are loving this list, be sure to give it a like and let us know down below what you think one of the worst moments in X-Men history is, both in terms of controversy or just in terms of bad things that have happened to mutants. Number 9. Beast's not so subtle disguise. At one point, the X-Men get kidnapped and brainwashed by Mesmero, forced to join the circus. At the time, Hank wasn't even really with the X-Men, but was instead a member of the Avengers. But when he answers a call from the mutants and finds the X-Mansion deserted, he still of course looks for his fellow friends and former and future comrades. While searching, Beast decides to adopt a disguise. This is already after Beast is covered in bright blue fur, so what disguise does he go for? Trench coat and a hat. You got it. Even stranger, for the most part, his disguise actually works. It's only after his hat is removed that even the brainwashed X-Men seem to realize that there's something weird going on with his appearance. Don't worry though, despite the fact that Hank is kinda awful at disguises in this story, he's still a brilliant and dexterous fellow who is able to help save the X-Men in the end. Number 8. Avengers vs. X-Men. Avengers vs. X-Men pitted two superhero groups both known for doing massive good and saving the world on countless occasions really, against one another. How do you even make these two groups fight one another? Enter the Phoenix Force. Avengers and X-Men decide to take one another on because they disagree on what to do with the Phoenix Force, which is headed to Earth to merge with its current ideal host, Hope Summers, the mutant messiah. The X-Men want to protect Hope but also think the Phoenix could be useful, while the Avengers think the cosmic power is too dangerous and should be destroyed. All in all, Avengers vs. X-Men created a lot of problems, especially for the X-Men going forward. It also is a big part of the later split between Storm and Black Panther, who were actually married at the time. While the X-Men and mutant kind were at least mostly united in this front, although, Wolverine had some conflicting feelings of his own about it, Avengers vs. X-Men was also considered to be one of the greatest clashing of ideals since the first Civil War event from 2006. Number 7. Foxx. Foxx was one of the weirdest X-Men to have never really existed, and also was pretty creepy considering the moves she put on Gambit. Foxx attempted to seduce Gambit away from Rogue at a time when the couple were having some pretty intense intimacy problems. I mean, Rogue and Gambit have had intimacy problems physically for years in the comics, but I'm talking about intimacy on really all levels, including emotional intimacy. Emma Frost at the time was trying to provide a sort of couples counseling for them and offer them a free space psychically for them to connect romantically in ways they couldn't in the physical world at that time. Foxx played on Gambit's struggles, flirting with him and offering herself physically to him. One, this was pretty messed up as Foxx was actually a mutant student of his, and 2, it was really messed up because it was later revealed that Foxx actually wasn't a student at all, didn't really exist, but was actually Rogue's adoptive mother Mystique in disguise, who didn't believe that Gambit was good enough for her daughter and later claimed to have been testing Gambit. Number 6. Cyclops kills Professor X. Now granted, this also happened as a result of the Avengers vs. X-Men story arc. Cyclops ended up killing Professor X because he was possessed by the Phoenix Force and ultimately had so much power with him that it basically corrupted him. But this was also not a great time for Professor X in comic book history, so even if you disagree with Cyclops' actions here, and I think most people do, I think you can at least understand why this happened. This was following a time where many dark truths about Xavier and his lies to the X-Men were unearthed. Among them was the sentience of the Danger Room, itself an AI cyborg mutant, as well as the revelation in Deadly Genesis that Xavier had sent Moira McTaggart's mutant team into Krakoa only for them to perish. Quote-unquote perish. A truth which Vulcan forced the professor to confess. Professor X was on a path of redemption at the time of his death at the hands, or rather optic blasts, of Cyclops, but he was still overshadowed by a pretty dark time in his own history. Number 5. Meet Daddy Nightcrawler. Probably one of the weirdest storylines we have ever had in comics happens to be one where we learned about the truth behind who Nightcrawler's father was. Did we need to know this? Did we really care about this? I mean, Kurt already had an adoptive family who are admittedly pretty cool, and he's got Mystique for a mom, which might not be as cool in terms of like Mystique being a good mom, but it's definitely interesting. But we also, I guess, had to give him a dad to help explain even more the way Nightcrawler looks and his powers. In a storyline where demonic mutants known as Neophim were pitted against angelic mutants known as Cheophim, implying that mutants are related to both heaven and hell, or at least some of them are, we learned that Azazel is a powerful, satanic-like demonic being who was actually Nightcrawler's father, and had only sired him in an attempt to free himself and his fellow Neophim from the Brimstone dimension where they were trapped. Number 4. Necrosha. The massacre at Genocian, which we talked about on part 1, was really bad. But even worse, it also paved the way for another tragic event when Necrosha happened. Tragic, scary, Necrosha's a lot of things. Necrosha was when Selene of the Externals, not to be confused with Marvel's Eternals, who are a totally different thing, decided to make her home base the devastated Genocian. Selene ended up taking control of all the dead left on Genocian, resurrecting them, and utilizing them as an undead army to attack the new mutant island of Utopia. Yeah, it was pretty bad. Not only does Selene seek to get revenge on the X-Men either, and also conquer Utopia, but her plan here is to basically become a bona fide goddess who would be pretty dangerous and scary indeed. Number 3. Inferno from 2021. During the most recent Inferno event, a lot of truths were unearthed about the true allegiances of those who came together to create Krakoa, and just exactly who was behind the whole mutant island paradise. Now, we already knew that story, but not all mutants, in fact not many mutants, did. The truth was that the idea of what Krakoa is was founded by Magneto and Professor X, as well as their ally and friend Moira McTaggart, who we recently found out during the House of X series was actually a mutant. Moira claimed she wanted to help her fellow mutants, but in reality she planned to actually end mutant kind, which is what's revealed in Inferno. But instead of destroying them, she wanted to disguise her destruction in the guise of a mutant paradise, kind of giving them like one last hurrah as they would eventually die out, as per her plan. During Inferno, Moira's betrayal was brought to light, and she was exiled from Krakoa. Number 2. Mutant Massacre. Now sometimes referred to as the Morlock Massacre, but back in the day it was simply known as the Mutant Massacre. This was before massive mutant attacks like Genocian ever happened, which is also what made this so much more shocking and horrible at the time. Although it happened on a smaller scale, the Mutant Massacre happened when Mr. Sinister in essence ordered the Morlocks be eradicated. He sent his team of marauders to handle them and attack, killing many who lived down in the sewers. It was, as it is called, a mutant massacre. For those unfamiliar, the Morlocks are less pretty mutants basically, ones who have dramatic physical mutations which often make it impossible for them to walk among humans on the surface world, at least without going unnoticed. So they tend to stick to their own kind and the sewers. Think the sewer mutants from Futurama, it's kind of what they're like. Morlocks, as such, sometimes are considered more antagonistic mutants who resent the mutants sometimes who are able to walk freely among men. Now, not all Morlocks are like that, and in reality, for the most part, they're actually peaceful and innocent folks who have been even more ostracized and rejected from the world than most other mutants. So it definitely didn't deserve to be massacred. It was really awful. Number 1. M-Day. M-Day has to have been one of the worst moments in mutant history. Although I actually gave Genocian the top spot on my part 1 of this list, that's because, I pretty much always talk about M-Day, we don't usually talk about Genocian, and I wanted to save that for a potential part 2, which I figured was coming, and here it is. Decimation is by far one of the worst things to have ever happened to mutant kind. Genocian simply doesn't get enough acknowledgement because it ended up being overshadowed by the devastation of M-Day, which happened only a few years later, with M-Day happening in 2005 and the massacre at Genocian happening in 2001. M-Day happened as a result of Scarlet Witch striking out at mutant kind after the events of House of M, where she attempted to create a reality where many heroes were happy, but after learning of its falseness, was once again rejected by all those she had basically tried to help. Namely though, Wanda was striking out at her then to be believed father, Magneto, who she claimed loved mutant kind more than he did his own family. Wanda said the words "no more mutants," and with that small utterance, depowered or destroyed millions of mutants the world over.
Number 10. Thor and Hela. Starting off with an example of why the Ultimate Universe does some unnecessary stuff from time to time, Thor was forced to kill his supervillain's son to save America from civil war. But what's funny, well not funny, is that wasn't even the unnecessary part. So it begins in the aftermath of an event called Ultimatum, which we will get to much later on. Basically, Ultimate Thor ends up sacrificing his own life to save his lover Valkyrie. While in the afterlife, in order to be reunited with and save Valkyrie, the goddess Hela makes Thor fight a whole army of undead soldiers, which he does. But then Thor asks what else he needs to do, and this goddess just starts undressing herself and demanding that Thor gives her a baby, which of course he does, and it doesn't even save Valkyrie. This comes back later with the child, Modi Thor's son, being raised by a much more villainous Loki, feeling abandoned and seeking revenge, trying to turn America into a new Asgard while wielding an Infinity Stone and forcing Thor to eventually strike down his own evil son. Number 9. Look what they did to my boy! Almost everyone loves Deadpool. Weirdly, even some moms love Deadpool. So when the gritty, realistic, mature Ultimate Universe was going to bring the character in, you'd expect it to be a match made in heaven. No! I blame this version of the character for the monstrosity we got 3 years later in 2009's X-Men Origins Wolverine. The ultimate Marvel version of Deadpool was a sergeant in the military named Wade Wilson. He's grim, he's angry, he's way too serious, and he also is an incredibly racist mutant hater. Oh, he was also a cyborg with incredible strength, he retained his signature healing factor, and instead of just being disfigured, he had no skin at all. And he's missing part of his skull, so his head is instead encased in a clear plastic case for everyone to see. Deadpool leads the Reavers, who are also racist, in trying to kill prominent mutants. Thankfully, Ultimate Deadpool was taken off the board by the 616 Deadpool in Deadpool Kills Deadpool in 2013. Number 8. Hank Pym needs to chill. Hank Pym has not really ever been that great of a dude. He has multiple untreated mental disorders and crazy insecurities that have caused him to do multiple not so great things in his time in the regular universe. But of course, everything in the Ultimate Universe gets ramped up a bit. Pym got involved in a very heated argument with his wife, Janet Van Dyne, over her friendship with Captain America. In Ultimates issue number 6, things start to get physical until the Wasp shrinks down to her smaller size to get away from her husband. Unfortunately, the terribly insecure Hank cornered her and sprayed her wasp-sized self with bug spray. She hid under a desk to catch her breath after inhaling the toxic fumes, while her husband just kept on with the emotional bombardment. But he didn't stop there. He then sent an army of ants after her until he realized what he was doing to his own wife. This stuff kind of boils my blood just a little bit. The fight resulted in Janet's very near death, her hospitalization, and his expulsion from the Ultimates. Number 7. Making the Maker. The Fantastic Four in the Ultimate Universe remained relatively the same, at least in their family dynamics. Their backstory was slightly modified, but overall the four main heroes lived as you'd expect, until it all went Marvel Ultimate-y. First off, Sue Storm and Reed Richards lost a child together, but then Reed Richards proposed to Susan Storm and she rejected his proposal. Just like that, the Fantastic Four was no more, but that's not the end. What came next, really quickly I might add, was Reed going absolutely bonkers, faking his death, de-lifing his family, planning alien terror plots around the world, being trapped in the negative zone where he primed his intellect by stretching his brain and skull, and he built an army. Since he was horribly burnt by the Human Torch, Reed took to wearing a helmet and founded the Children of Tomorrow, the Dark Ultimates, and he called himself the Maker. He became an incredibly evil Reed Richards. Number 6. Cap hates France? Look, despite the name, Captain America, Steve Rogers, is very much a protector of the world, not just America. So it was really odd when in Ultimates number 12 from Mark Millar, Brian Hitch, and Paul Neary, we see the Ultimate Marvel Universe Captain America verbally wailing on France, of all places. Captain America is caught in a fight with Herr Kleiser, an old German rival. Just for better context, Nick Fury is there too. Captain America is obviously the hero though, so eventually he gets the upper hand. It was just so odd that when Kleiser was pinned by Cap and asking for surrender, well, Cap digs his shield into the dude's stomach and says, "Surrender? Surrender? You think this letter on my head stands for France?" The comment was kind of fueled by the time period it was written in, as the states were entering into a war and France refused to join them, leading to some anti-France feelings in the real world. But this World War II era dig at the country left a bad taste in pretty much everyone's mouth, especially from a character that is supposed to be much, much better than that. Number 5. Wolverine. Why are you so weird? Look, I'm gonna get into all the weirdness that is the Ultimate Universe Wolverine in a sec, but one thing that kind of immediately sticks out is how this version of Wolverine seems to repeatedly swing for ladies that are a little below his age bracket, or like a lot below, and always redheads, which I guess kinda checks out from the 616 version too. Jean Grey, Firestar, and the one we're talking about today, Mary Jane Watson. In Ultimate Spider-Man number 66, Wolverine and Peter Parker end up switching bodies after Wolverine makes some unwanted advances on the teenage Jean Grey, who psychically swapped their bodies. I don't know why she did that, but she did it. Wolverine finds some drawbacks, but apparently they pale in comparison to the perk that is the teenage Peter's girlfriend, Mary Jane. Wolverine tells MJ that he, in Peter's body, doesn't need to go to school, while also making some crude advances towards her as well. It comes off as kinda creepy and really cringy. Number 4. Wolverine. How you die. Now, on the topic of Wolverine, he himself has quite a few moments that make him kinda awesome and some that make him kinda horrible. Ultimate Wolverine is no longer feral, and he does not have the classic healing factor. Instead, he gets the survival factor, which is kind of a heck of a lot better. He can survive a heck of a lot, almost anything. S.H.I.E.L.D. chopped his body off, leaving only his head, and he breathed through his skin. They put his head in a vacuum and he went into stasis. Hulk ripped his body and threw it into another mountain range, and when Wolverine found that half, it was still fresh, no organ failure, no rot, and the blood was somehow still pumping, and he just put himself back together again with no issues. Ultimate Wolverine is unkillable by any means, no matter what you do. It was also implied that Ultimate Wolverine was the precursor of all mutants. He was sort of the first mutant in the world, so all the other mutants are basically products of Weapon X experimentation on Wolverine. On top of that, his blood could be synthesized into a substance that gives mutants insane power boosts. Marvel made Ultimate Wolverine insanely overpowered, and then they absolutely killed him in the stupidest way possible. He died because Magneto did a hand wave thingamajig, as someone on Reddit said, and apparently he destroyed every single one of Wolverine's cells while ripping out his adamantium. Number 3. Is this Game of Thrones? If you haven't noticed by some of the previous points, Marvel did a lot of unnecessary sexualizing of the Ultimate Universe. And to just push it a bit further into unnecessary odd choices made by Marvel for this universe, they included the incestuous relationship between the characters of Scarlet Witch and Quicksilver. Somehow it actually feels worse than the one in Game of Thrones, maybe just because it was extremely shocking and the two characters never had anything even similar to this in the 616 continuity. Fans wondered whether it was really necessary for Mark Millar to pair the two characters together and questioned whether the twist added anything new to the story at all. Answer: it didn't. Probably the biggest issue with this revelation is that now the characters can't so much as look at each other without fans accusing the writers of returning to the incest plot from the Ultimate X-Men. Number 2. Blob. After the events of that Ultimatum thing, which I'm so close to talking about, many heroes were taken out and or unaccounted for. One such hero would be Janet Van Dyne, the Wasp. Now, as we know, Hank Pym, Ant-Man, was kind of the worst, and though a terrible husband, he still diligently looked for his missing wife. What he found instead was the villain the Blob feasting on her remains. It's probably one of the most striking images from the whole Ultimate Universe, but it just gets stranger and somehow worse. Enraged at the sight of it, Ant-Man converted to his giant man state and picked up the Blob in his giant hand and bit Blob's head clean off and spat it on the ground to the shock and horror of his teammates. And in at number 1 is Ultimatum. Ultimatum was supposed to be how the writers finished off the Ultimate Universe stories. Obviously it didn't turn out that way, but as you can tell from previous points, writers kinda just went a little haywire with things they would do with a dying universe story. Basically, Magneto, who has been a pretty brutal villain in this universe so far, goes even farther during the mega event where stakes were way high. Basically, after Magneto gains control of the Hammer of Thor and is manipulated by none other than Dr. Doom, he messes with the magnetic pillars of the world, flipping them on their head and sending weather into a frenzy. The big event was a giant tsunami called the Ultimatum Wave that basically put New York underwater and brought a giant casualty list along with it. Bruce Banner drowns, but the Hulk lives, the Wasp gets eaten, as mentioned before, and Quicksilver and Scarlet Witch are killed off. In a bit more of a divisive move, while the X-Men are looking for their fallen teammates in the wake of the tidal wave in New York, Magneto pays a visit to Professor X and in a pretty brutal scene, snaps the professor's neck. Magneto also rips the adamantium from Wolverine's skeleton and pretty much disintegrates him like we talked about before. Number 10. Black Widow and Iron Man. A change in the Ultimate Universe that actually made sense in my head for some reason was the relationship between Tony Stark and Black Widow. Shortly after Iron Man joined the S.H.I.E.L.D.-sponsored Ultimates team, he and Natalia Romanova struck up their relationship, and it went so far the two eventually got engaged, with Tony even giving Black Widow her own nanite-controlled suit of armor, which did look really cool by the way. But the happy couple didn't last too long, as it turned out that Natalia was actually a traitor, working for the Liberators, which is a whole other thing we could talk about. After she turned on Tony, she managed to end the life of his longtime butler and close friend Jarvis. Kind of an unredeemable act there. So it didn't feel so bad when Tony used the nanites inside Natalia's body, the ones used to control that fancy new armor, to paralyze her and steal information from her brain about the Liberators and her betrayal. And then he knocks her unconscious with a wine bottle, giving her brain damage. There was also this whole raunchy video that got leaked of the two, which just felt completely random to me, but hey, it happens. Number 9. Black Panther. A lot of stuff in the Ultimate Universe I can look past, but I gotta say I don't like what they did to Black Panther here. You see, in the Ultimate Universe, T'Challa Udaku, the youngest son of King T'Chaka, when he became jealous of his older brother M'Baku, who was set to take on the Panther Trials, T'Challa decided to secretly go do it himself. What are the Panther Trials? Well, it basically involves hunting and defeating an actual panther in combat. So yeah, the young T'Challa ain't ready for that kind of thing, and he loses. Badly, with the Panther actually tearing out T'Challa's throat. Being brought back to Wakanda, he undergoes 16 hours of surgery, and even then, the supposedly super advanced nation is not able to save him. So of course, they turn to the United States of America. Specifically, they turn to the super reliable Weapon X program. Now, Weapon X is able to save T'Challa, minus his vocal cords, but similar to Wolverine, they give him mutant abilities that enhance his strength, speed, stamina, agility, night vision, and they even give him retractable bone claws, and then give him the title of Black Panther. He is then put under the control of Nick Fury, who refuses to let him go back to Wakanda, makes him the property of the United States, and has him trained under Captain America. Now there is more to this story, but taking the awesome culture-rich Wakandan hero and making him a sort of Wolverine clone who can't speak and is the property of the United States government just kinda feels wrong, man. Number 8. Victor Von What? This point is going to cover one very small thing. For the ultimate version of Dr. Doom, I honestly don't have much issue with the changes they implemented. The metal skin, the goat legs, the backstory change, even what they did to his kingdom, it's alright, I guess, for me. One thing I cannot abide is changing his last name to have him seemingly related to a real-world action star. Victor Van Damme? Van Damme? Why? Who do these buffoons think they are? Sorry, I'm getting a little worked up here. He was also way more of a petty character than he was an extremely dangerous villain. Luckily, that changed slightly before the Ultimate run came to an end, but the damage was done. Let's just move on. Number 7. Blue goo. Maybe this is more just really weird as opposed to a horrible moment, but thanks to sci-fi writer Orson Scott Card of Ender's Game fame, we got a version of Iron Man who, due to a virus that led to the passing of his mother and affected Tony upon his birth, lives in constant pain unless he's coated in this really strange blue goo created by his father, which was developed as a sort of bio armor. It does the trick, but it's still rather odd, and fans were not fans of this change. Personally, I think a lot of the changes made to Iron Man's backstory in the Ultimate Universe were really interesting, and it was different from 616, which made it fun, but the blue skin was an interesting choice to say the least. This point is a little unfair as Marvel decided to retcon this out of his history, but that don't change the fact that it did indeed happen, and it was rather strange too. Number 6. Hulk eating people. The Incredible Hulk has always sort of tiptoed the line between being a hero and being a monster. In the 616 universe, we can more often than not say he is a hero, but in the Ultimate Universe, not a chance. For starters, his origin already starts Bruce Banner off on a bad foot. He is made to feel inferior by both his ex and other heroes, which is what spurs him to become the Hulk in order to feel bigger, I guess? Sounds like a supervillain to me. That's because he basically is. After he transforms, he goes on a rampage through New York, taking out more than 800 people and even eating some of them. Sure, the idea haunts Bruce, which we learn in the Ultimate Hulk solo comic as he recounts the feeling of eating a person, but there isn't really a redemption here. Also, what the hell is up with the whole Freddie Prinze Jr. thing? It's hilarious, but what? Number 5. Lack of Sabretooth. Sabretooth has always been a pretty terrifying dude. He ain't nice, he's extremely violent and extremely hard to bring down. And even more so in the Ultimate Universe, he becomes bonded with adamantium similar to Wolverine and even has retractable bone claws out of his forearms, also like Wolverine. Doesn't really need them, as he also eventually has his naturally occurring claws on each fingertip as well as his fangs and teeth laced with adamantium to just bump up the amount of absolutely bloody carnage he can produce. If this sounds awesomely terrifying, it's because it is, which makes it a shame when he doesn't really do much. Sabretooth in the Ultimate Universe, similar to 616, is kind of just a lackey to Weapon X and then later to Magneto. It just feels wrong to make such an imposing villain more imposing but not give him much to do. Number 4. Sabretooth versus Angel. Oh, actually, there is one thing of note here that Sabretooth does. One thing that was incredibly brutal and unnecessary in true Ultimate Universe fashion. In the aftermath of Magneto's ultimatum wave, he and Sabretooth waited in the Arctic for the heroes to come and try to apprehend them in Ultimatum issue number 4 from 2009. The first to arrive was Warren Worthington III, or Angel, who came crashing through a window with a punch straight to Magneto's big old face. But after Magneto gave the go-ahead, Sabretooth pounced at the crash-landed mutant, scratching the living hell out of his back, tore off one of his wings with his teeth, seeming to enjoy the brief cannibalism, and then stomped on Warren's neck with his boot, taking out the mutant in another of the Ultimate Universe's unceremonious dispatching of a fan-loved character. Thanks, Ultimate Universe! Thank you so much. Number 3. Dormammu and Doctor Strange. Speaking of unceremonious dispatching, Angel wasn't the only hero to meet his end in issue number 4 of Ultimatum. Right at the beginning of the comic, it seems that the Hulk's rampaging has led to Doctor Strange's Sanctum Sanctorum, and he begins just smashing everything, including magical items, which results in a blinding flash of light. Next thing we know, the dread Dormammu is free from the dark dimension and is in magical conflict with Doctor Strange. But Dormammu seems more than confident that he won't be defeated by the Sorcerer. It takes merely a few pages before Dormammu uses the Sorcerer Supreme's own sash, belt, cloak thingy, constricting it around Strange's body so tightly that it explodes his head in an extremely grotesque couple of panels that I'm not sure we're even allowed to show. Just like that, the normally extremely powerful Dr. Stephen Strange is out of the picture. Number 2. Hawkeye's family tragedy. Say what you will about the ultimate version of Clint Barton. He is much less heroic than his 616 counterpart, he is a S.H.I.E.L.D. sponsored killer, and he is much more of a secret agent. Ultimately, he is the basis for the MCU's version of the character, from his look to his family. But what the Ultimate Universe did to his family, or more specifically what Black Widow did to them, I should say, will likely never be seen in the MCU, which we should all thank our lucky stars for. As we talked about all the way up at the 10th point, Natalia Romanova did not turn out to be a great gal. She was working for the Liberators, a group of heroes from around the globe who were opposed to the amount of power held by the United States thanks to S.H.I.E.L.D. and the Ultimates. It was a cool, realistic concept, and one that could have opened up the comics to more worldwide inclusiveness. Instead, it was kind of just a way to make America seem superior. After Natalia's revelation as a traitor, she organized the assassination of her longtime Black Ops partner Hawkeye's entire family, even personally taking out his son Callum. For her crimes, Clint does put an arrow between her eyes in Ultimates 2's final chapter, as she is in a hospital bed thanks to Tony Stark giving her brain damage. It doesn't really help the whole situation. And in at number 1, Peter Parker comes back to life. One of the key things about the Ultimate Universe was supposed to be its realism, or at least its realism in a universe full of superheroes, sorcerers, gods, and monsters. One of the aspects of said realism was the fact that death would be permanent, which is about as real as you can get. The only problem was that didn't seem to last. One of the best things about the Ultimate Universe was Ultimate Spider-Man. It's regarded as not only the best thing out of that universe, but one of the best Spider-Man stories ever told. His eventual death after saving many people in Ultimatum, taking a bullet for Captain America, and then fighting and defeating Norman Osborn and the Six was equally as amazing, if not tragic and emotional. It also paved the way for another one of the Ultimate Universe's best, Miles Morales. So in order to make that amazing story and all the emotional weight it had going for it mean absolutely nothing, what do you know? Peter Parker wakes up in some underground laboratory, seemingly revived. Yay!
Number 10. Wolverine loses his skeleton. During 1993's Fatal Attractions crossover event, the X-Men once again had to go up against their old rival, Magneto. The X-Men got the upper hand in this conflict by using the combined psychic powers of Jean Grey and Professor X to cause Magneto to relive all of his worst memories in order to distract him, which is already pretty brutal when you consider that Magneto was a prisoner in German death camps in World War II. Wolverine attacks Magneto and gets a good scratch in, which leads the Master of Magnetism to do one of the most disturbing things imaginable to the fuzzy Canadian. He pulls out Wolverine's metal skeleton, leaving him a twisted heap of adamantium as the X-Men can only look on in horror. It's a brutal moment, but it doesn't really fit the never saw it coming side of this. I mean, he's a guy with metal bones fighting a guy named Magneto. If anything, I'm surprised this doesn't happen more often. Number 9. Sentry vs. Ares. When Norman Osborn set his sights on conquering Asgard, he tricked the god of war Ares into helping him do it. As the battle raged on, Ares discovered that he had been tricked and turned on Osborn, vowing to destroy him. Unfortunately, Norman had the Sentry with him. Worst still, this version of Sentry had given in to the darker urges of his void self. Ares did his best against Sentry, but the fight ended in a truly brutal fashion, with Sentry ripping Ares in half in a shower of gore and entrails. It's a lot, but although you could make the case for it being one of the most graphic Marvel moments, I don't think it checks enough emotional boxes for me to consider it the most brutal by any means. Number 8. Punisher's Steamroller. Frank Castle isn't known for working well with others, but if there's anyone you'd think he'd get along with, it would be Wolverine. They teamed up in Punisher Volume 6, number 17, and it quickly went off the rails, with them being swarmed by a gang of little people who wanted to cut off their legs in order to make them short. In order to get Wolverine into a fit of berserker rage, Frank makes fun of Logan's height, causing Wolverine to go after him. Wolverine calmed down, but Punisher decided that he was slowing him down and blasted Wolvie's legs apart. After taking care of the gang of little people, Frank decides that the best way to keep Wolverine from coming after him is to run him over with a steamroller. Wolverine will obviously heal, so it doesn't have long-term consequences, but it's still a pretty rough move on Frank's part. Number 7. Alpha Flight vs. Michael Pointer. During the events of M-Day, a mutant named Michael Pointer was taken over by an evil being called the Collective, who used him to destroy an Alaskan town. S.H.I.E.L.D. sent in a couple fighter jets to keep an eye on the situation, situation, but they were promptly destroyed and the Collective made his way into Canada. Now, keep in mind, this is a list of brutal moments for me. So imagine my excitement reading an Avengers issue where my favorite superhero team, Alpha Flight, shows up to try and reason with the villain. Now imagine my horror when the SHIELD agent's command center suddenly loses contact and the next thing I saw was the entire team's twisted and mangled corpses. These guys had their own 130 issue series for years, so it's not like they're just nobodies, and now they were suddenly just dead. Now I get that not many people like the team as much as I do, so for perspective, imagine if your favorite team was the Fantastic Four, and they were horribly mutilated off-panel. Oh, poor Guardian. That's like the 5th time he's died. I think that what makes this such a brutal moment for me, beyond my personal attachment to the characters, is that it is so quick and off-panel, leaving us to imagine what horrible things were done to leave such a terrified-looking gory mess of Canada's super team. Number 6. Rick Jones's fate worse than death. Immortal Hulk is a cosmic horror series with plenty of brutal moments, with characters constantly getting eviscerated and transformed into creatures that are pure nightmare fuel. You could make the case for Banner, Absorbing Man, or any of the Hulks earning this spot, but no one quite got as brutal a fate as Hulk's old friend Rick Jones. When the Shadow Base wanted to go after the Hulk, they combined the deceased Rick's body with that of the Abomination, causing Rick to transform into a bizarre and terrifying creature with 2 of Rick's faces and hands growing out of his head, which would vomit acid at the Hulk while Rick begged for help. He was eventually removed from this abomination, but a few issues later, he was once again fused with a gamma mutate, this time Del Fry, leaving Rick a twisted co-joined mess with Rick's screaming head being the arm of a glowing green skeleton creature. Number 5. Carnage USA. One of Spider-Man's most brutal and sadistic villains is Carnage. He is a serial murderer named Cletus Cassidy, who bonded with a symbiote and became an even more dangerous and twisted villain. He has had a lot of brutal moments over the years, such as his actions in Maximum Carnage and Deadpool vs. Carnage, but my preference is for the miniseries Carnage USA. In this story, Carnage goes to a small town and sneaks into a meatpacking plant in order to eat an entire herd of cattle so that he can get strong enough to take over the town. He sends the symbiote in through the water pipes and takes over men, women, and children, forcing them to attack each other and holding a few of them hostage for and amusement. There are some brutal Cletus moments, such as sending a woman out to collect her husband's head in order to secure the safety of her children, but my favorite and most twisted is when he gathers all of the survivors in a church, hands out a bunch of pliers, and demands they pull out their own teeth in exchange for his mercy. Number 4. Deadpool kills the Marvel Universe again. In Deadpool Kills the Marvel Universe, Deadpool became aware of his status as a fictional character and lost his mind, going on a brutal kill streak that resulted in all the Marvel heroes and villains getting dispatched in cruel and unusual ways. A few years later, in the sequel, we got to see a Deadpool from another world do the same thing. On this Earth, Deadpool is put under mind control by the villains of the Marvel Universe and tricked into going after his friends. What makes it even more disturbing than the first for me was the fact that while he's attacking the heroes, he is living a fantasy in his head that makes him think that he is going on lighthearted adventures with his friends. This is especially true of his encounter with Spider-Man while bonded with the Venom symbiote. In his mind, Deadpool and Spidey are entered into a pie-eating contest against the Blob in order to win money for charity. In reality, he's actually feasting on Spider-Man's brains. It's more brutal due to the lack of agency he's given in his story and the devastating consequences that it holds. Number 3. The Ultimatum Wave. The Marvel Ultimate Universe was a wild ride. It gave us Miles Morales as well as the romance between Scarlet Witch and Quicksilver, so it makes sense that they would also give us some of the most bizarre and extreme Marvel stories. In Ultimatum, Magneto has been driven mad at the loss of his children and decides that rather than destroying humanity to make the world safe for mutants, he's just gonna kill everyone. He uses a doomsday device and his powers to shift the world off of its axis surface, causing natural disasters all over the globe. Much of Europe, including all of Latveria, is frozen under a layer of ice, and New York is hit by a massive tidal wave. Millions of people all over the world die in the attack, including Nightcrawler and Hank McCoy. Magneto then sends out more of his minions to destroy the heroes, causing the brutal deaths of several more heroes, including Hank Pym, Doctor Strange, and Thor, just to name a few. Professor X gets personally murdered by Magneto, who later has his face blasted off by Cyclops, who then gets assassinated at an anti-mutant rally. It is a relentless story, but I think the most brutal moment is when Pym finds his wife Janet being eaten by the Blob and responds by entering his giant form, picking up the Blob, and biting his head off. Number 2. Marvel Zombies. Marvel Zombies is pretty self-explanatory. It takes place on an alternate Earth where the heroes of the Marvel Universe have been infected with a zombie virus. They retain much of their intelligence and personality, but they are so consumed with hunger that they are willing to go to any lengths to get to their next meal. There is something so brutal about watching all of your favorite heroes hunt down Magneto and brutally and graphically eat him in the opening pages, and it only gets more disturbing from there. I'd say that the most brutal moment in this story is the revelation that Hank Pym has been keeping T'Challa sedated but alive in a lab, and he has been removing his limbs one by one to eat. It's a brutal and disgusting story that you can't help but have fun reading. Number 1. Spider-Man's take on September 11th. There are way more gory and graphic Marvel moments on this list, but the fact that this comic features the real-life tragedy of September 11th, 2001 makes it hard to justify putting it lower on the list. Like, I can't sit here and say that a fictional tidal wave was worse than this. Anyways, this issue of Amazing Spider-Man was released a month after the tragedy and opens with Spider-Man surveying the devastation as civilians ask him why he didn't stop the attack. The book is kind of a mixed bag with the benefit of hindsight, with devastating moments like a little boy lost in the rubble looking for his dad, but also features moments like Doctor Doom crying at the sight of the devastation, as if he hasn't tried to do this exact same thing multiple times. I have mixed feelings about whether this book should have been made so soon after the real-life events, but wherever you land, it's hard not to describe the events depicted as pretty brutal. Number 10. Punisher ends the human race. In the one-shot comic, Punisher: The End, we are introduced to a prison that is executing all of its prisoners in preparation for an upcoming nuclear war, with the guards planning on then hiding out in a bomb shelter that is installed. One of the prisoners is actually Frank Castle, who has grown older and has been caught and locked up. He gets in the shelter before the blast comes, and after a year, he and a companion from the prison exit and start making their way through the wasteland. Frank knows that the radiation levels he is exposing himself to will cause him to die within 72 hours, but keeps moving forwards, eventually getting to his goal: a shelter filled with former billionaires who knew their decisions would lead to an apocalypse and hid themselves away. He prepares to punish them, but the sleazy rich people convince him to spare them long enough to explain the seriousness of the situation to him. The other shelters have fallen silent, and they have the means to continue the species, and if Frank ends them, he will also be ending the human race. Frank then mercilessly and brutally murders everyone, including his companion, before walking into the wastelands to die, happy with his decision, believing nothing good ever came from humanity. It is an interesting book, but it leans so far into the mature rating that characters tend to overindulge in an unnecessary amount of slurs and swears, to the point that it actually somehow makes the whole thing feel more childish than many standard Marvel comics. Number 9. Deadpool Killustrated. The sequel to the first Deadpool Kills the Marvel Universe features Deadpool trying to destroy the Marvel Universe by going into other fictional stories that inspired the Marvel heroes in order to prevent any of them from being created. Over the course of the miniseries, we see Deadpool brutally dispatch such classic characters as Don Quixote, the Little Mermaid, Tom Sawyer, the siblings from Little Women, Moby Dick, and the Three Musketeers, while he's pursued through through the ideas verse by a team of heroes led by Sherlock Holmes. If you're a fan of these classic characters, it can be really brutal to suddenly see them eviscerated as they scream and cry, asking why this is happening. But the sheer stupidity of it obviously makes it pretty funny. The humor cuts some of the brutality, making this rank pretty low on the list. Number 8. Scramble gets free. This next entry is dedicated to one of our commenters, Kevin Hawkins, who has asked that I keep teaching him about Canada's super team, Alpha Flight, so that he can continue to learn about more obscure superheroes in order to help him expand his rather narrow tastes. Sure thing, Kevin, I'll keep the Alpha info coming. The original Alpha Flight series had its fair share of brutal moments, but one that has always stuck in my mind is from issue 30, when Heather accidentally releases Madison Jeffries' evil brother, Lionel, otherwise known as Scramble. Scramble has the mutant power to rearrange organic matter. He originally used this power as an army medic in the Vietnam War, but the trauma of the war drove him insane and he was locked away in a hospital. Once he got free, he used his powers to turn the other patients into deformed and grotesque mounds of mutated flesh that then attacked the heroes. Every design in this issue is wonderfully brutal and disgusting, including the creature that Heather is transformed into. The victims are eventually saved and put back in their original shapes, which makes this a bit less brutal, but it was an especially disturbing issue. Number 7. Thanos Rising. Thanos Rising is a mini-series that explores the origins of one of Marvel's most iconic villains, Thanos the Mad Titan. It starts with him as a child, and explores his early courtship with Death, who keeps manipulating him into situations that cause Thanos to kill. At first he is taking out lizards that hurt his friends, but this soon escalates into him capturing classmates in order to dissect them to see what is wrong with him in comparison to others. He insists that all the death is just a means to an end, but eventually admits that he has grown to enjoy it. This solidifies when he decides to capture and dissect his mother so that he can continue to find out why he is different, showing no remorse or care for his actions. It is a brutal origin for the character, and honestly, for a character as twisted as Thanos, nothing else would have sufficed. Number 6. Deadpool kills his parents. Part of the original Sin Comics, Deadpool Volume 5 Issue 34 features a twisted tale from the Merc with the Mouth's past. It takes place in the 90s and is drawn in a style that reflects that. In this story, we see Deadpool in his early days as a brainwashed assassin. His handler decides to test how deeply they have Wade under their control and sends him and Sabretooth to his childhood home with the mission of ending the lives of his own parents. Wade doesn't have much memory of his past and eagerly goes for the house, but he is stopped from attacking his parents. Kevin, you are never gonna guess who stops him. It's 90s Alpha Flight, who I'm honestly surprised haven't crossed paths with Deadpool more often. The two teams fight, and Sabretooth and Deadpool manage to get away, their mission a failure. The jovial tone of the book then takes a sharp turn as Deadpool grabs a drink, returns to his childhood home, and silently takes a tour of the strange and familiar sights before setting the house on fire and getting into the car with Sabretooth without a word. The fact that the book is so lighthearted before this moment makes the final blow so much more brutal. Number 5. Hulk, The End. While I found Punisher, The End to be kinda bad and immature despite trying really hard to be mature, I really like the Hulk, The End story. In this book, the world has come to an end after a nuclear war, and all of humanity has died off, save Bruce Banner, who is now over 200 years old. He wanders the world by himself, wanting to die, but being unable to, as the Hulk wants to continue being the strongest one there is. The only creatures that have survived are giant mutated swarms of bugs, who chase and devour the Hulk, always leaving him a mutilated mess on the ground before leaving him to heal. This continues for years until Bruce realizes that he is the modern Prometheus, who brought fire to the people of Earth from the gods and was punished by being left alone to be consumed by birds. Bruce finally passes, leaving the Hulk to wander the wasteland completely alone for all time. Number 4. Marvel Zombies, Dead Days. In Marvel Zombies, we are shown a world where all of the Earth's heroes have been transformed into flesh-eating zombies who are trying to find more humans to consume to sate their seemingly unending appetite. In the one-shot comic Dead Days, we are shown the last days of the human race, as well as our favorite heroes becoming the cruel monsters we know from Marvel Zombies. There are some brutal and disturbing moments, such as Spider-Man turning and eating Mary Jane. Okay, Kevin will appreciate this. We get to see the zombified Alpha Flight attacking the X-Men after having ate Professor X before they are graphically dispatched by Magneto. We also get to see She-Hulk eating Val and Franklin Richards before having her head blown off by Sue Storm. Every page is more disturbing than the last, but I think the worst part is when Reed Richards decides that zombies are actually the next step in evolution and infects the other Fantastic Four members and then allows them to feed on him and turn him as he smiles. Number 3, Civil War. For anyone only familiar with the movie adaptation of Marvel's Civil War, the reasons behind the Superhero Registration Act are a bit different, and much more awful. The story begins with the superhero team the New Warriors about to raid a home in Stamford, Connecticut, where a group of supervillains are hiding out. The New Warriors were filming a reality show and were being extremely careless when they attacked the villains. The resulting fight led to the villain Nitro and Namorita fighting in front of a school full of children. Nitro then exploded, wiping out the school and the surrounding area. Hundreds of civilians, most of the villains, and most of the heroes all died as a result. It is a rough way to start off the book and really does a good job of setting up the moral quandary at the heart of the story. Number 2, Ruins. You guys were super helpful with recommendations in the comments in part 1, and a lot of the entries on this list are from there, so thank you. One of the ones I wasn't familiar with that a lot of you mentioned was Marvel Ruins, and you were right. It's a rough one. Marvel Ruins is a 2-part mini-series that essentially asks the question of what would the Marvel Universe be if instead of accidents resulting in heroes getting powers, they just got sick and died. For example, in this universe, Matt Murdock saved the old man from getting hit from the truck, and the radioactive goop that got in his eyes caused him to die in the hospital without growing up and becoming Daredevil. Wolverine has a painful bone disease. Captain America introduced Nick Fury to cannibalism at some point. Jean Grey is a teenager selling herself on the street before being killed by Fury, who then takes his own life. Okay, Kevin is gonna be so thrilled. We even get a brief look at Alpha Flight's Aurora and North Star, who are homeless, naked, and starving on the streets. Everything is awful. But my favorite bit comes from issue 2, where it is revealed that when Peter Parker was bitten by the radioactive spider, it gave him a deadly and contagious radiation disease that is spreading among the population. The book is relentless. There's not really much of a story thread other than what if everything sucked? And it answers that question in great and brutal detail. Number 1, the death of the X-Men. The Old Man Logan story takes place on an Earth where the villains finally got organized and teamed up to take over the world, under the command of the Red Skull. The book is filled with disturbing ideas and moments, such as Hulk having an evil gang of Hulk children with his cousin She-Hulk, but the worst in my opinion is how the villains took out the X-Men on the night they came to power. Wolverine was monitoring the situation with Jubilee when the X-Mansion was suddenly attacked by supervillains. As the children fled, Wolverine made a brave final stand against the bad guys, cutting them down one at a time until there were none left. It was then that Mysterio revealed that the whole thing had been an illusion, and Logan had been attacking his own teammates the entire time. I don't think it gets worse than that. Although, I can picture it happening to Adam here at Top 10 Nerd.